Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to pick a defense and stick with it. Grandmaster Robert Hess did that against Ruslan Ponomarev in round 1 at the FIDE Chess.com Grand Swiss. This is another edition of Missed on the Isle, and I intend to show you exactly how Robert defended the king and rook versus king, rook, and bishop endgame with discipline and, as I said, commitment. Now, in these endgames, there are two types of defenses that work, and you can mark them down so that you know their names. There is the pinning defense, which is what Robert actually chose, starting with the move rook d8 that pins the bishop to the king. There's also the second rank defense, which Robert did not go for, that we're going to come back and instruct upon just to give you a few more educational nuggets to put in your pocket and take home. Robert played the move rook to d8. The key idea behind the pinning defense is that even with a king that is eventually forced to something as bad as the first rank, like this, as long as you maintain the pin on the bishop and king and don't panic and change that defense, eventually the king and bishop will have to split themselves. Here's what I mean by that. If black just sits tight with the rook, which is what Ponomarev started at first, but here he realized Robert's not going to blink. He's going to maintain the pin. So rather than just shuffling the rook on the second rank, eventually you're going to move the king and try to unpin your bishop. The problem with doing that is no matter which side of the board you committed to, whether it was c4 as Ruslan did or e4, these squares necessary, of course, to maintain defense on the bishop and unpin it, the bishop doesn't have any way to go with the king to that side of the board because the bishop is blocked. That means on the next move, the bishop will have to improve itself to the other side, as was done in the game. Note the term splitting the king and bishop. And whenever that happens in these defensive setups, you will now have the opportunity to strike all the way down the board and break the second rank hold. This pattern of defense, pinning the piece in the middle of the board and sticking with the pin until your opportunity to strike and break the stranglehold, is one of the most common, easiest ways to defend king and rook versus king, rook, and bishop. After a few more moves with the second rank broken, Ruslan actually just gave Robert a draw. The point here is that when the rook comes down, you're either going to rinse and repeat and allow me to keep breaking the second rank, check me to freedom, or don't cover the second rank, in which case my king is just going to run forward. In the game, Ruslan played king c3, but that doesn't guard enough for the second rank squares. So a few more moves, a few more accurate pinning moves, keeping the rook on the file by Robert, left Ruslan with nothing more than even offering a draw right here. Maybe a little early, but knowing he's probably at least 10-15 moves away from even getting the king back to a rank or even the h-file, he just agreed and gave Robert the draw. This position here, though, is very, very key in showing that Robert had the patience to keep the pin. Often people in these cases panic, and they're worried about the king coming forward, so they rush the rook to a lateral check. They want checks, so they play rook h8. Problem with these moves is that it allows the king to come forward, where if you commit to these lateral checks, you're just mated on the spot in the next move. Well, at this point, it may be even too late to go back. If you can't check laterally and you go something like rook e8 check, well, now the bishop comes to e4, and we see the ideal setup for a king and bishop and a king, rook, and bishop. Guarding the escape squares, meaning that both king f1 runs into mate, as does king d1. So just one slip up, panicking away from your pin defense instead of maintaining your discipline like Robert did with king d1 can lose you these endgames. So learn the pin defense just as Robert did and stick with it with discipline. Know that the moment you split the king and bishop, as was done in the game, you will find your opportunity to break the second rank stranglehold. Now, speaking of second rank, the other way to draw the game that Robert didn't would have been the move rook to e2. This is known as the second rank defense, which is naturally a little scarier because you have to put yourself in harm's way, willing to sacrifice for stalemate. But I wanted to show it anyway because it's super instructive and may have even been the easier way to draw for Robert. After rook e2, things like bishop to c4, they look very strong. These forcing moves where you push the king and rook back to the first rank. The problem is that they don't work because of the very, very well-known and common themes you need to make yourself aware of, rook to d2. The rook is poisoned because of stalemate. You either rinse and repeat with a draw or continue to allow me to hold the second rank, and you can never make progress. Even moves like rook to f3 check fail to similar types of stalemate ideas where you just sit on the second rank, and if they come too close, guarding too many squares, you remember things like rook c2 check, where the game is just a draw again because of the poisoned rook to stalemate. So that type of defense, along with the pin defense, are the two that you need to know if you ever want to defend king rook versus king rook and bishop, and Robert Hess displayed them perfectly for us from the island. Remember, you can check out the official broadcast daily, brought to you by Anna Rudolph and Danny King at Chess.com TV and Twitch.tv/chess. There's a lot on the line at the FIDE Chess.com Grand Swiss, a seat at the candidates, and an opportunity to perhaps win that to challenge Magnus Carlsen for the biggest throne and title in the game. Thanks for watching. Give us a like, give us a subscribe if this happens to be on YouTube, and we will see you around on Chess.com.